Okay, so you want to own a bowling alley. A business built on one of the last true American third places. Somewhere a family can spend an entire Saturday afternoon for less than the cost of a movie. Somewhere a company can rent out for a holiday party. Somewhere a retiree can bowl the exact same Tuesday night league he has bowled for 30 years. It sounds like one of the most durable small businesses left in the country. People do not stop wanting somewhere to take the kids because of a recession. Leagues do not cancel themselves because interest rates went up. Here is what nobody tells you. The nostalgia is real. The community is real. The profit is a completely different question, because a bowling alley is one of the strangest businesses in America, a business that requires more upfront capital per square foot than almost any other form of entertainment, sitting on a product that costs $2 a game to sell, propped up entirely by everything else you can talk a customer into buying once they are already through the door. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why an industry with this much built-in nostalgia can still bleed an owner dry, and why the version of this business that fails almost never fails because people stopped wanting to bowl. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about what a bowling alley actually is, because that phrase covers several very different businesses standing under the same flickering marquee. A traditional league house is built around recurring block bookings. The same 8 teams on the same lanes every Tuesday and Thursday night, 40 weeks a year, running on thin per-game margins and thick loyalty. A modern family entertainment center treats bowling as just one attraction among many, wrapping it in an arcade, a laser tag arena, private karaoke rooms, and a full kitchen, deliberately capping bowling itself at well under half of total revenue. A boutique or duck pin concept sells atmosphere over athletics, cocktails, DJs, and a design budget that rivals a nightclub, charging by the hour instead of by the game. And a franchise-branded megacenter licenses a national name and a proven layout, trading a steep franchise fee and an ongoing royalty for instant brand recognition and a playbook someone else already tested. These are not small differences. 2 buildings can each have exactly 24 lanes and post almost nothing in common on their income statements.
There is also a distinction almost nobody outside the industry thinks about, and it matters enormously. A bowling center and the leagues that bowl inside it are 2 separate financial worlds that happen to share the same building. The center owns the lanes, the pin setters, the building, and the bar. The league itself, its dues, its prize fund, its year-end banquet money, is typically collected and held by a league secretary or treasurer, often a volunteer bowler rather than an employee of the house, on behalf of the other bowlers. The center simply rents that league its lanes for the season. Nationally, well-run centers still depend on league play to fill their weeknight hours, the exact hours that would otherwise sit completely empty, which means a house with a strong, loyal league base can post dramatically better off-peak numbers than an identical building 2 towns over with no league culture left at all. That single fact has quietly separated the centers that survive a slow Tuesday from the ones that simply close early and eat the loss. The first number that surprises people is what it costs just to open the door. Total startup costs for a bowling center in 2026 range from around $800,000 for a smaller independent build-out to well over $5 million for a large, ground-up family entertainment center with high-end finishes, and a full franchise route can run $25 to $45 million once territory fees and brand standards are included. The lanes themselves are the biggest recurring line item. New construction and lane equipment alone typically runs $80,000 to $150,000 per lane once you include the pin setters, the scoring system, and the physical build-out around it, which means a modest 10-lane boutique venue can easily require $1.5 to $2.5 million before the front door ever opens.
Then comes everything that turns a room full of lanes into an actual entertainment venue. A commercial kitchen and bar build-out, since food and beverage will eventually carry more of this business than the lanes themselves. An arcade or events wing, because modern operators increasingly treat bowling as the anchor for a much larger footprint rather than the entire attraction. Scoring systems and lane surfaces that need periodic resurfacing on a cycle measured in years, not decades, quietly built into every serious owner's long-term capital plan from day one. and a decision that shapes decades of maintenance cost before a single ball was ever thrown. Whether to install traditional free-fall pin setters or the newer, lower-maintenance string pin setter systems, a choice that meaningfully changes both your opening costs and your mechanics' overtime for the next 20 years. And then there is the number almost nobody budgets correctly: monthly overhead. Because here's the part that catches new owners off guard. A typical commercial bowling venue carries something in the neighborhood of $87,000 a month in fixed costs before a single variable expense, split between payroll running close to $50,000 a month and commercial rent frequently above $20,000 a month on its own. Industry data consistently shows new centers taking 14 to 36 months to reach break-even, which means you are covering that entire fixed overhead every single month for well over a year before the business is reliably paying for itself. Layered on top of that overhead is a cost new owners rarely price out until the insurance quote actually arrives.
A bowling center combines heavy rotating machinery in the pin setters, alcohol service on the same floor as young children, and a building full of moving lanes and thrown objects, all under one roof. A combination that pushes general liability and equipment coverage well above what a similarly sized restaurant or retail space would ever pay. Skip or underinsure that coverage to save money in year one, and a single serious pin setter injury or a single slip-and-fall lawsuit can erase several years of otherwise healthy margin in one settlement. So how does a business like this actually make its money once the doors are open? This is where it gets interesting. Because a bowling center's revenue, just like a funeral bill or a wedding invoice, is never really one price. It is a stack of separate revenue streams, and understanding that stack explains almost everything about how this industry behaves.
The first layer is the game itself. Lane rental, charged either per game at an average cost of around $2 or increasingly through yield-managed hourly pricing on the lane itself, typically $30 to $60 an hour for 4 to 6 people, deliberately priced higher on Friday and Saturday nights than on a slow Tuesday afternoon. On its own, bowling typically accounts for only 40 to 50% of a well-run center's total revenue, which tells you almost everything you need to know about where this business actually survives. The second layer is food and beverage, and just like the casket in a funeral home or the catering in a wedding venue, this is where the real margin lives. Industry benchmarks consistently show non-bowling revenue running close to 67 cents for every dollar of bowling revenue, driven overwhelmingly by food, alcohol, and vending, with well-run kitchens and bar programs posting gross margins in the 65 to 70% range.
A center that treats its kitchen as an afterthought caps its own earning potential permanently. A center that treats the kitchen as the actual business, wrapped around a bowling attraction, can push total food and beverage well past its lane revenue entirely. The third layer is the arcade, the parties, and the events. Birthday packages, corporate outings, laser tag add-ons, and private party rooms, typically representing another 20% of total revenue on their own. This is the layer that turned the old-fashioned bowling alley into what the industry now calls a family entertainment center, and it is almost entirely optional margin that a pure bowling-only operation simply leaves on the table. The fourth layer is dynamic and algorithmic pricing, and it represents the industry's biggest structural shift in the last decade.
Where a game once cost the same flat rate no matter the day or hour, large operators now adjust lane pricing in real time based on demand, pushing Friday and Saturday night rates meaningfully higher than a Tuesday afternoon, the exact same yield management logic an airline or a hotel uses on a room. It is enormously effective at extracting more revenue from peak hours. It is also the single most common complaint bowlers themselves raise about the modern version of this business, because the same lane that used to cost a flat, predictable rate now costs a different amount depending entirely on when you show up. The fifth layer, and the one that keeps a traditional house financially stable year over year, is league play itself. recurring block bookings that guarantee a house its weeknight revenue for an entire season booked months in advance, functioning almost like a subscription business layered on top of an entertainment venue.
And this is exactly where the industry's version of pre-need money lives.
League dues are collected today, often months before a single prize is paid out or a single year-end banquet is held, and in most houses, that money sits in whatever account the league secretary happens to use, with no state requirement, no trust, and no outside audit standing between that balance and whoever is holding the checkbook. In New York, that exact gap produced a genuine scandal. A man named Stephen Donahue served as the manager and state tournament director for the organization representing New York's bowling leagues, a chapter that at its peak represented roughly 85,000 bowlers across the state. Over time, Donahue was accused of stealing roughly $274,000 from those league and tournament funds.
When the National Bowling Congress uncovered the shortfall,
It did something it had never done before in its history. It revoked the New York chapter's charter entirely, freezing the state organization's money and voiding its ability to sanction any tournament in the state, leaving 85,000 ordinary league bowlers collectively paying the price for one man's access to an account nobody else was regularly checking. This was not an isolated case. In Virginia, a woman hired specifically to manage a bowling center's league funds was later accused of quietly siphoning off more than $60,000 over roughly 6 months, money that belonged to the weekly bowlers whose dues she had been trusted to hold. Different states, different decades, different amounts. The same underlying mechanism every time. Money paid in by ordinary members for a prize fund or a banquet months away, sitting in an account with essentially no independent oversight, waiting for the one person holding the login to decide it is easier to spend than to protect. A different kind of trust failure, and a much stranger one, shows up when you look at what happens on the physical structure of these buildings rather than their finances. Bowling centers built through the middle of the 20th century were overwhelmingly constructed using a specific roof design called a timber bowstring truss, a wide, arched wooden frame chosen specifically because it let builders span an entire block of lanes without a single interior support column interrupting the room. For decades, nobody outside the fire service gave that design a second thought. It was simply how a bowling alley's roof was built. On October 15, 1967, that design failed in the worst possible way at Cardinal Lanes, a bowling alley in Cliffside Park, New Jersey. Firefighters from multiple neighboring towns responded to what investigators later determined was an arson fire, arriving to find heavy smoke pouring from every side of the one-story building. A crew of 5 volunteer firefighters from the neighboring town of Ridgefield stretched hose lines to a rear door and prepared to make entry. The moment that door opened, a built-up pocket of gas ignited, and the bowstring roof gave way instantly, the force of the blast throwing the crew's sole survivor 25 feet through the air. The collapsing roof brought a cinder-block wall down with it, trapping roughly a dozen firefighters underneath rubble at the rear of the building. Despite frantic efforts by the more than 130 firefighters battling the blaze that night to dig their colleagues out, 5 of the trapped Ridgefield firefighters did not survive. What makes this case so unsettling, decades later, is not the fire itself, but the gap it exposed. The bowstring truss roof over Cardinal Lanes was not a defect unique to that one building. It was the standard, celebrated design choice used in bowling alleys, supermarkets, and showrooms across the entire country for exactly the same reason. Wide open floor space with no support columns in the way. Nobody had systematically accounted for the fact that the same wooden trusses holding that open space up would fail catastrophically, and almost without warning, once fire weakened the wood enough. The tragedy at Cardinal Lanes is now taught in fire academies specifically because it forced New Jersey to rewrite its fire safety codes around a structural risk that had been sitting, unaddressed, over the heads of bowlers and firefighters alike for decades, in buildings just like it all over the country. Put those two stories side by side, and a pattern emerges that has nothing to do with either case's individual details. One collapsed the financial side of trust. League money paid in advance for a prize fund or a banquet, sitting in an account nobody was required to independently check. The other collapsed the structural side of trust. a roof design used nationwide for decades because nobody had been forced to confront what it would do under conditions nobody had planned for. Neither failure required a uniquely broken bowling alley. Both simply required an entire industry treating something as safe by default for long enough without anyone in a position to actually verify it.
Against that backdrop, the modern bowling industry has consolidated harder and faster than almost any other segment of American small business. And understanding why explains where the real money in this business has moved. Over the past decade, a single publicly traded operator, now rebranded as Lucky Strike Entertainment after years of operating as Bolero Corporation, has acquired more than 350 individual bowling centers across the country, folding nearly every recognizable regional chain into one national platform backed by private equity capital from the very beginning. That scale gave the company the leverage to introduce exactly the kind of algorithmic, demand-based pricing described earlier, and to deprioritize the traditional league business in favor of higher margin, walk-in, and party traffic.
It also, as of this year, made the company the target of a class action lawsuit filed by a group of longtime bowlers, accusing the platform of antitrust violations and of fundamentally changing the economics of a pastime that used to run on flat, predictable pricing and loyal weeknight leagues. Whether or not that lawsuit succeeds, the underlying shift it is reacting to is already complete. Nearly every independent operator left in this industry is now competing directly against a single, scaled competitor with pricing technology and purchasing power no standalone 12-lane house can realistically match. Now, let's put real numbers against two versions of the same bowling center, because this is where the honest math either supports the nostalgia of this business or quietly undermines it. In the optimistic scenario, a well-run 24-lane center with a strong food and beverage program, a healthy events and party calendar, and enough surviving league business to fill its weeknights can generate somewhere between $1.5 and $4 million in annual revenue. With operators who successfully push both bar revenue and off-peak utilization, reaching EBITDA margins in the 30 to 35% range, among the strongest margins in the entire entertainment industry once the fixed costs of opening are behind you. A stable league calendar means an owner can see an entire season of guaranteed weeknight revenue booked months in advance, smoothing out a business that would otherwise be almost entirely dependent on unpredictable weekend walk-in traffic. In the realistic, difficult year, several ordinary pressures compound at once. A newly opened or newly acquired competitor down the road, backed by the same national consolidator's purchasing power and pricing technology, undercuts your walk-in traffic on exactly the weekend hours that used to carry your entire month. Your league base, already aging the way league bowling has been aging nationwide for 2 decades, shrinks further as fewer of those weeknight slots get rebooked season after season, quietly removing the one revenue stream that used to guarantee your Tuesdays and Thursdays regardless of the weather. Meanwhile, a bowling-only operation that never built out its kitchen or its arcade watches its highest margin potential revenue simply flow to whichever nearby center did make that investment years earlier. Your fixed costs, the payroll, the commercial rent, the resurfacing cycle on lanes that cannot be indefinitely delayed, do not move an inch, regardless of how many of those lanes are actually being used on a given Tuesday. Under those conditions, a center focused purely on bowling, without the diversified revenue layers built in from the start, can watch its margins compress dramatically in a single season, sometimes falling from a comfortable operating margin into the single digits, even while the building looks exactly as busy on a Saturday night as it always has. Because in this business, Saturday night was never really the number that mattered. The Tuesday and Wednesday nights were. And those are exactly the hours a diversified, league-anchored center is built to protect, and a bowling-only operation is not. So, does owning a bowling alley actually work as a business? The honest answer is that it works extremely well for the people who understand it is not really a nostalgia business selling an evening with the family.
It is a fixed-cost real estate and equipment operation selling a $2 game as the anchor for everything more profitable you can build around it. In an industry now dominated by a single-scaled competitor with pricing technology and buying power, no independent 12-lane house was ever designed to match.
The guaranteed appeal was never the hard part. People will keep wanting somewhere to take the kids on a rainy Saturday, and a handful of bowlers will keep showing up on the exact same Tuesday night for as long as the lights stay on. The hard part was building a business that survives on 67 cents of everything else revenue for every dollar the actual game brings in, and building a level of trust in the roof over everyone's head and in whoever is holding the league's checkbook, sturdy enough that nobody ever has to find out the hard way which one was never actually being checked.